The Zealoty survey fleet dropped out of hyperspace with the kind of routine precision that came from doing the same job for decades. Captain Veltar stretched his 6 limbs and looked out the yellow star ahead of them, already knowing exactly what they'd find. Another primitive world. Another species that thought they were the center of a universe. Another report to file with the Galactic Collective about why this particular bunch of aliens wasn't ready to join civilized space. Veltar had been running first contact surveys for over 30 years, and he could predict these missions in his sleep. The pattern was always the same. Young species start with fire and the wheel, eventually figure out metal working, stumble through an industrial revolution, split the atom, and then spend a few hundred years trying not to blow themselves up before they finally get their act together enough to join the galaxy's bigger community. "Beginning full system scan now, sir," called out Lieutenant Commander Zixera from her station. She was young for this kind of work, still excited about discovering new worlds. Veltar remembered being that eager once, back when every new species felt like an amazing discovery instead of just another entry in an endless catalog. The third planet from the star immediately caught their attention. It was beautiful, he had to admit that. A blue and green marble swirl with white clouds, exactly the kind of world that produced interesting species. The preliminary scans started rolling in, and Veltar found himself reading results that matched his expectations perfectly. Water-based life forms, sir. Oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere. Single dominant intelligent species spread across most of the planetary surface. Zixera's excitement was obvious in her voice. They've organized themselves into separate territorial groups, and they're showing clear signs of early technological development. Veltar nodded, pulling up the detailed scans on his personal display. The humans, that's what their communications called them, had managed to split the atom, which was always a big milestone, but they were still using chemical rockets to barely escape their own gravity well. Their energy production was crude and inefficient, mostly burning fossil fuels with some basic nuclear power thrown in. Their space presence was laughably small, a tiny research station orbiting their planet, and a handful of small outposts on their moon. "Look at their transportation systems," laughed Navigation Officer Riksdal, pointing at the surface scans. "They're still using wheeled vehicles that burn refined petroleum. And their aircraft, they're using the same basic jet propulsion they developed decades ago." The crew gathered around the main display as more data flowed in. The humans had built some impressive cities, but their construction techniques were basic. Steel and concrete mostly, with some primitive attempts at advanced materials. Their communication networks were developing nicely. They'd figure out global information sharing through something they call the internet. But they were still decades away from quantum communication. "What's their social structure like?" Veltar asked, already knowing the answer, but following standard protocol. Zixera pulled up the sociological analysis. "Typical for a pre-FTL species, sir. They've divided themselves into nearly 200 separate political entities. Lots of competition for resources, some cooperation on major projects, but mostly they're focused on local concerns. They show the usual aggressive tendencies we see in young species, but nothing unusual. Some wars, some peace treaties, the normal back and forth." Veltar studied the readouts, making mental notes for his report. The humans were actually doing pretty well for their level of development. They'd managed to avoid destroying themselves with nuclear weapons, which was more than many species could claim. Their population was stable, their technology was advancing at a reasonable pace, and they showed that spark of curiosity that made for good collective members eventually. "Any signs of FTL research?" he asked, though the question was just formality. "Some theoretical work, sir, but nothing practical. They understand the basic principles, but they're nowhere near actual faster-than-light travel. I'd estimate they're at least 2 centuries away from leaving their solar system." That timeline sounded about right to Veltar. Maybe 300 years if they hit some major setbacks. Maybe only 150 if they got really lucky with their research. Either way, this was definitely a check-back-later situation. Standard observation protocols then. Veltar decided, settling back in his command chair. "We'll monitor their development for the next few years, file our preliminary reports, and recommend a full contact evaluation in about 50 years. By then, they should have established permanent colonies in their outer solar system and be working seriously on interstellar travel. The bridge crew nodded and began setting up the long-term observation equipment. Just another routine mission, cataloging another primitive species. Earth would get a standard entry in the collective database. Promising but early-stage civilization, aggressive but manageable, recommend patient observation until technological maturity. If only they knew what they were really looking at. 3 months into their observation mission, the Zealothy crew had settled into the comfortable routine that came with monitoring primitive civilizations. Every day brought the same predictable reports about human activities. They watched the humans launch their crude chemical rockets, monitored their basic satellite communications, and tracked their slow progress in expanding their tiny space stations. It was exactly the kind of steady, boring work that experienced survey teams expected. Sensor technician Kolwan had drawn the morning shift in the sensor bay, running routine scans of the solar system while sipping his favorite blend of imported coffee. He'd been doing this job for 15 years, and he could identify space debris, asteroids, and natural phenomena in his sleep. The humans occasionally sent small probes to the outer planets, usually tiny things about the size of a personal transport. So when his instruments picked up something in the asteroid belt, he didn't think much of it at first. Probably another one of their Mars rovers that got lost, he muttered to himself, adjusting the scanner resolution to get a better look. The humans were always losing equipment in space. Their navigation systems were so primitive that half their deep space missions ended up drifting off course. But as the scanners focused in on the object, Kolwan's casual attitude evaporated. The readings didn't make sense. This thing was huge, way bigger than any probe the humans had ever built. He ran the scan again, thinking his equipment might be malfunctioning. The results came back the same. Whatever was floating out there between the 4th and 5th planets was absolutely massive. Computer, display object size comparison. Kolwan ordered, his mandibles starting to click nervously, a habit he developed whenever something unexpected happened. The holographic display showed their survey ship next to a mysterious object, and Kolwan nearly dropped his cough. The unknown vessel was at least 10 times the size of their ship, possibly larger. This wasn't some lost human probe. This was something else entirely. He quickly ran to the collective databases, searching for any known ship designs that might match what he was seeing. The hull configuration was unlike anything in the records. It had a long, cylindrical main body with extended sections that looked almost like wings or solar collectors. The surface appeared dark and lifeless, but there were definitely artificial structures all along its length. "This can't be right," Kolwan whispered, running more detailed scans. The object was definitely artificial. No natural space formation looked like that. But if the humans hadn't built it, and it wasn't in the collective databases, then what was it? His excitement grew as more data flowed in. The hull showed signs of serious age and damage. Whatever this thing was, it had been floating in space for decades, maybe longer. Micrometeorite impacts had pitted its surface, and there were scorch marks that suggested some kind of engine failure or explosion. "Captain, you need to see this right now." Kolwan called out over the ship's communication system, his voice tight with disbelief and growing excitement. Captain Veltar arrived in the sensor bay within minutes, followed by Lieutenant Commander Zixera and several other senior officers. The bridge crew rarely got excited about anything during observation missions, so when Kolwan's urgent call came through, everyone knew something significant had happened. "What have you found, technician?" Veltar asked, studying the displays with experienced eyes. "Sir, there's a massive artificial object in the asteroid belt. It's at least 10 times our size, possibly larger. I've run it through all our databases, and it doesn't match any known collective ship design." Kolwan brought up the enhanced scans on the main display. The bridge fell silent as everyone stared at the image. The mysterious vessel drifted dark and silent against the backdrop of space, its hull scarred and pitted like it had been floating there for decades. Despite the damage, its artificial nature was unmistakable. This was definitely a constructed object, not some natural space formation. Could be a derelict from an unknown species, Veltar muttered, but even as he said it, something bothered him. There was something familiar about those hull markings and design elements. The proportions, the structural patterns, They reminded him of something he'd seen before, but he couldn't quite place what. Zixera stepped closer to the display, her eyes scanning the vessel's details. "Sir, look at these marking patterns along the hull. They're not random damage. They look deliberately placed, almost like writing or identification symbols." Kowan enhanced that section of the scan, and the markings became clearer. They definitely look like some kind of script or symbolic system, but not like anything in the collective's linguistic databases. "Wait a minute," Navigation Officer Rixdow said suddenly, his voice filled with growing concern. "Those symbol patterns, I've seen them before. They look similar to the writing we observed on human satellites and space stations." The bridge crew exchanged worried glances. That was impossible. The humans were barely capable of reaching their own moon, let alone constructing massive interstellar vessels. But as they studied the markings more carefully, the similarities became harder to ignore. "This has to be a coincidence," Veltar said firmly, but his confidence was starting to waver. "The humans are a primitive species. There's no way they could have built something like this." But deep down, a cold feeling was growing in his stomach. Something about this discovery felt very, very wrong. Captain Veltar assembled his best boarding team for what everyone expected to be a routine investigation of unknown alien technology. Chief Engineer Brixnell packed her full analysis kit, excited about the possibility of discovering new scientific principles. Security Chief Daxron checked his protective gear twice, not knowing what kind of defensive systems they might encounter. Medical Officer Yelnara brought her xenobiology scanner, ready to analyze whatever alien life support systems they might find. The team suited up in their standard exploration gear, running through the checklist they'd used dozens of times before when investigating derelict vessels. Everyone expected to find the typical signs of an unknown alien civilization: strange architecture, incomprehensible technology, maybe some clues about what had happened to the ship's original crew. They'd done this dance many times before with ships from species that had gone extinct or abandoned their vessels for unknown reasons. But the moment they stepped through the airlock into the massive vessel, everything they thought they knew began to crumble. "This doesn't look right," Daxron muttered, scanning the corridor with the security sensors. The hallway was clearly designed for bipedal creatures about the same height as humans. The proportions were all wrong for any known collective species. The ceiling height, the door frames, even the handholds along the walls. Everything suggested builders who stood roughly 6 feet tall and walked upright on 2 legs. Brixnell ran her scanner over the wall panels and immediately got readings that made her antenna twitch with confusion. "These materials are incredible. The hull composition is some kind of advanced metamaterial that's actually absorbing my scanner beams. I can't get a proper reading on molecular structure, but the density ratios are off the charts." As they moved deeper into the ship, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Every surface, every interface, every piece of equipment bore design elements that looked disturbingly familiar. The door controls had symbols that resembled human mathematical notation. The corridor layouts followed engineering principles that seemed similar to human spatial reasoning. Even the color schemes used blues and greens that suggested human aesthetic preferences. "Look at this," Yelnara called out from a side corridor. She'd found what appeared to be crew quarters, and the sleeping areas were clearly designed for human-sized occupants. The beds were the right length and width for human bodies. The personal storage areas were positioned at heights that would be comfortable for human reach. There were even what looked like entertainment screens positioned at angles that would be perfect for human viewing. But this was impossible. The humans on Earth were still struggling with basic space travel. They couldn't even maintain a permanent base on their own moon, let alone construct vessels of this size and sophistication. Chief Engineer Brixnell made her way to what appeared to be the engine section, and what she found there shattered every assumption she'd held about human capabilities. The fusion reactors were not only more advanced than anything in the collective fleet, they were more advanced than anything in the collective's theoretical research. The magnetic containment systems used principles that their own scientists were only beginning to understand. "Sir, you need to see this right now," she called over the communication system, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. "These fusion engines use a magnetic bottle design that shouldn't be possible with any known technology. The energy output calculation suggests this ship could maintain faster-than-light travel for months without refueling. The navigation section revealed even more shocking discoveries. The quantum navigation arrays were at least a century ahead of current collective technology. These systems could plot courses across galactic distances with precision that their own ships couldn't match. The computational power required for these calculations was staggering. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery came when they found the ship's main computer core. The user interfaces were clearly designed for human hands and human cognitive patterns. The symbol systems matched human mathematical and linguistic structures. There was no mistaking it. This vessel had been built by humans, operated by humans, and designed for human needs. This ship was built for a journey measured in decades, maybe centuries, Bricksnell reported as she analyzed the life support systems. The hydroponics bays were massive, designed to feed thousands of people for extended periods. The water recycling systems were more efficient than anything on Collective Worlds. The atmospheric processors could maintain perfect environmental conditions for what appeared to be generational travel. The manufacturing facilities they discovered were perhaps the most impressive of all. This wasn't just a transport vessel. It was a mobile industrial complex capable of producing everything from basic tools to advanced electronics. The automated production systems could manufacture replacement parts, construct new equipment, and even build smaller spacecraft if needed. This isn't an exploration vessel, Bricksnell concluded, staring at the massive cargo bays filled with terraforming equipment and colony construction materials. This is a colony ship. The humans built this to establish permanent settlements on other worlds. The implications hit the boarding party like a physical blow. If humans had built this technological marvel, then everything they thought they knew about human civilization was completely wrong. The primitive species they'd been observing on Earth was apparently capable of engineering that surpassed the most advanced worlds in the collective. Captain Veltar stared at the evidence surrounding him, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. How had they gotten it so wrong? Captain Veltar led his team deeper into the ship, heading for what their scans indicated was the main computer core. If they were going to understand what they'd stumbled into, the ship's databanks would hold the answers. Chief Engineer Bricksnell worked alongside him, carefully interfacing their portable systems with the alien human technology they'd discovered. "I'm getting power to the main systems," Bricksnell reported, her instruments humming as they connected to the ship's dormant network. The backup power cores are still functional after all these years. Incredible engineering. These systems were built to last centuries. The central computer core was a massive chamber filled with crystalline storage matrices and quantum processing units that made their own ship's computers look like primitive calculators. But what really caught their attention were the human language interfaces and the familiar mathematical symbols displayed on every screen. "Beginning data extraction now," announced Navigation Officer Yixtel, his tentacles dancing across the human control interfaces with surprising ease. The system architecture is actually quite logical, just far more advanced than anything we've seen before. As the first files began downloading, Veltar noticed something that made his stomach drop. The ship's identification codes were clearly visible on every screen. UES Meridian, registry number HCF 2847, United Earth Colonial Fleet. The dates in the file headers showed construction beginning over 250 years ago, with launch occurring 230 years before their current observation mission. "Captain," Yixtel's voice was barely a whisper, "you need to see this immediately." The main display lit up with a three-dimensional star map that showed the local galactic region. But this wasn't any star map the Collective had ever seen. Hundreds of flight paths stretched out from Earth's solar system like spokes on a wheel, reaching toward star systems throughout the outer spiral arms. Each path was marked with detailed navigation data, fuel calculations, and arrival timelines. "This can't be accurate," Veltar muttered. But even as he said it, he could see the mathematical precision in every calculation. "Show me the fleet composition data." What appeared on screen next made everyone in the room fall silent. The UES Meridian wasn't just one ship. It was part of something called the Colonial Fleet Program that had launched dozens of massive vessels over a period of several decades. Each ship was designated for a different star system, carrying between 200,000 and half a million humans in advanced cryogenic suspension. Bricksnell pulled up the technical specifications of the fleet, and the numbers were staggering. Sir, according to these records, the humans built and launched 47 ships of this class between 2157 and 2201. Each one carries a complete colonial infrastructure, terraforming equipment, industrial fabricators, genetic banks for establishing ecosystems, and enough supplies to establish permanent settlements. The personal logs from the Meridian's crew told an even more incredible story. Captain Rebecca Chun, the human commander, had maintained detailed records of their journey until the catastrophic engine failure that left them stranded. Her final entries described the successful evacuation of the ship's population to other vessels in the fleet before the remaining ships continued toward their designated systems. Look at these destination coordinates. Yixtel said, his voice filled with growing alarm. He highlighted system after system on the galactic map. Kepler 438, Wolf 1061, Proxima Centauri, TRAPPIST 1. These are all systems the collective has marked for future expansion. According to these logs, human colonists should have arrived at most of these locations over a century ago. The timeline was becoming clear, and it was terrifying. While the Zealothi and other collective species had been following their careful, methodical approach to galactic expansion, spending decades studying each system before attempting colonization, the humans had launched a massive wave of colonial expeditions that covered half the outer spiral arms. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from the communications logs. The Meridian had maintained contact with Earth throughout its journey, receiving regular updates about developments back home. The logs showed that Earth's government had deliberately maintained their planet's appearance of technological primitiveness, even as their colonial fleets spread across the galaxy. They'd been hiding their true capabilities for over 2 centuries, Veltar realized. Staring at communication records that detailed careful management of Earth's space program to maintain the illusion of slow technological progress. Every rocket launch we observed, every primitive space station, every crude satellite, it was all carefully designed to make us think there was still a pre-FTL civilization. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. While collective survey teams have been cataloging Earth as a primitive world requiring careful observation, human colonies had likely been establishing themselves on worlds throughout the galaxy. The backward species they've been monitoring was actually the home base of what might be the largest interstellar civilization in known space. Medical Officer Yelnara discovered personnel files showing the incredible diversity of skills represented in just this one colonial expedition. Scientists, engineers, terraforming specialists, genetic engineers, industrial designers, and thousands of other professionals, all transported in advanced stasis systems that kept them perfectly preserved for journeys lasting decades. As the full picture emerged from the ship's databanks, Captain Veltar found himself staring at evidence of the most sophisticated intelligence operation in galactic history. The humans hadn't just achieved interstellar travel. They'd managed to convince every other spacefaring species that they were still primitive while secretly colonizing half the galaxy. The observation mission was over. They weren't studying a developing civilization. They were trespassing in the territory of an empire. Captain Veltar stood in the computer core of the U.S. Meridian, surrounded by evidence that turned everything he thought he knew about the galaxy upside down. For 30 years, he'd been conducting first contact surveys with primitive species, always following the same careful protocols. Study the civilization, assess their development level, file reports, and move on. But this time, the primitive civilization had been studying him right back. The weight of what they'd discovered was crushing. Earth wasn't some backward world stumbling toward space travel. It was a carefully maintained capital of an interstellar empire that had been expanding across the galaxy for over 2 centuries. Every observation his team had made, every report they'd filed, every assumption about human limitations, all of it was based on an elaborate deception that spanned multiple generations. Communications Officer Dexera to Captain Veltar came the urgent voice over his communicator. "Sir, you need to return to the bridge immediately. I'm picking up readings that don't make sense." Veltar and his team rushed back to their ship, leaving the Meridian's databank still downloading their shocking revelations. When they reached the bridge, Dexera was staring at her instruments with wide eyes, her tentacles trembling with nervous energy. Sir, I started running deeper scans of the solar system after we found that ship, and I'm detecting quantum communication arrays everywhere, she reported, her voice barely above a whisper. They're hidden, but they're there. Advanced communication networks that have been operating right under our sensors this entire time. She brought up a new display showing the solar system, but this time with previously undetected signals highlighted in red. What appeared to be empty space was actually buzzing with activity. Hidden transmitters in the asteroid belt, cloaked monitoring stations on the outer planets, and sophisticated relay networks that connected everything together in a web of constant communication. These signals are incredibly advanced, Dexera continued, her instruments picking up transmission patterns that made their own communication systems look primitive. They're using quantum entanglement communication that operates faster than light. We can't intercept the actual messages, but we can detect the carrier signals, and sir, they're talking to everything. The scope of the hidden infrastructure was staggering. While the Zealoty had been watching Earth's primitive space program launch chemical rockets and maintain basic orbital stations, an entirely separate network of advanced facilities had been operating throughout the solar system. Mining operations in the asteroid belt that they completely missed. Deep space monitoring posts that had been watching their every move. Communication relays that kept Earth in constant contact with dozens of distant star systems. How did we miss all of this? Demanded Chief Engineer Brixnell, studying the readings with professional horror. Our sensors should have detected these installations. Because they didn't want us to see them. Veltar realized the full implications finally hitting him. This isn't just advanced technology. It's advanced technology specifically designed to hide from our detection methods. They've been studying us just as carefully as we've been studying them, learning exactly how our sensors work, so they could build systems that would remain invisible. Navigation Officer Yixtel pulled up long-range communication data, and what he found made the situation even more alarming. Sir, I'm tracking quantum communication signals heading toward at least 40 different star systems. Based on the signal strength and directional patterns, these appear to be regular status reports being sent to established colonies. The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed what this meant. The humans hadn't just sent out colonial expeditions 2 centuries ago. They were still in active communication with those colonies. This wasn't ancient history. This was a living, breathing interstellar civilization that was operating right now. Today, with Earth serving as its command center. They've been watching us this entire time, Veltar said quietly, staring at the tactical display, showing their ship's position surrounded by hidden human monitoring stations. Every scan we've run, every communication we've sent back to the collective, every move we've made, they've been recording all of it. The observation mission had become something entirely different. They weren't studying a primitive species anymore. They were trespassing in the territory of what might be the most powerful civilization in known space, a civilization that had been carefully managing their perception of human capabilities for months. Security Chief Daxron checked his tactical sensors and confirmed what everyone was beginning to suspect. Sir, we're being scanned right now. Multiple sources, using technology one don't recognize. They know we're here, they know what we found, and they're definitely watching our every move. The implications for the Galactic Collective were enormous. All those worlds they'd marked for future expansion, worlds that human colonies had likely reached decades or even centuries ago. All those first contact protocols they developed for dealing with primitive species. Completely useless when dealing with a civilization that had been hiding its true capabilities from the beginning. Sir, Dexera's voice interrupted his thoughts. I'm receiving a transmission from Earth. It's directed specifically at our ship, using our communication protocols, and transmitted in perfect Zealoty language. Veltar's blood ran cold. The humans shouldn't know their language. They shouldn't know their communication protocols. They definitely shouldn't be able to target their ship with such precision. Put it through, he ordered, knowing that everything had changed. The collective hadn't discovered a primitive species to guide into civilization. They'd stumbled into the backyard of an empire that had been watching them the entire time, and now that empire was ready to talk.